All right. So, obviously, if you couldn't tell from the intro video, we are talking about, is the Bible true? Why can we trust the Bible? And is the Bible reliable? Is our translation working, brother?
Yes.
Cool. Good. There's no sense in me talking if literally half the people in here can't understand it. So, there you go. So, we want to make sure they can hear. So, glad that's working now. So, before we get started, that's what we're going to do. We're actually not going to talk about this. We will talk about this specific Bible in a little bit, but we're not going to talk about this because I'm not going to go, well, this is true because this says it's true. And that's kind of circular, right? So it can say it's true, but how do we know it's true outside of it? So we're testing the reliability on this and kind of putting it on trial, which ties into a story I have. When my beautiful wife and I were dating, I worked at a beautiful, lovely place called Chick-fil-A. And so I would open, and I had, if you've ever worked with a motley crew, they were lower than the motley crew. So these guys, they were rough. So we're working one day, and this guy whose first name is Logan, he's in the Navy now, which is terrifying after I tell you this. He comes up to me, my best friend, and another manager. And I was like a pseudo manager. I'd been there so long that they just treated me like a manager. So he comes up and goes, hey guys, I have something to tell you. And we're like, what, Logan? He usually played pranks and silly stuff. What, Logan? Guys, Amanda, another coworker, just tried to sell me crack in the walk-in freezer. Okay. And so we go, oh my gosh. Because it's by Amanda could have done that. So, motley crew, y'all. Like, the problem was Logan was not reliable at all. So we send him away, and the three of us, we get together and we go, okay, guys, what are we going to do about it? And we go, he's so unreliable that we didn't feel like we would have probable cause to search her bag. That's how bad this guy was. And if someone called us under oath, we couldn't say in good conscience that he was telling the truth. So we did nothing. And it could have just been a salt packet. That was also possible. So Logan is so unreliable that we go, maybe it happened, but if anyone else said it, sure, no way, we're not going to jail for you, bro. Anyway, so we're going to talk about the reliability of the Bible. He's in the Navy. We don't have any Navy people in here. We have some Air Force and Army guys in here. So there you go. Those people join the Navy. They get sent off on ships away from humans, which is good, far away. So anyway, I'm glad he's serving our country. So the reliability and accuracy of the Bible is critical because Christians today, most of us, agree that the Bible is the inspired holy word of God. However, it can be inspired, but if it's not the same as when it was first written, it doesn't do us any favors. So the book can be inspired, but if we don't have what the book was, it's not inspired anymore because we don't know what the inspiration was, right? That would be like me writing a story on I'm gonna pick Kyle, on Kyle, and then it ends up looking like Lalo. That's not the same, right? We can look and say that's not the same story. You know what I'm saying? And so what I do want to do is make something very, very clear. Christianity is one of the only religions that invites external critique and internal critique. So that means that if you're a Christian, we say ask questions. We will figure out answers together. And if we say if you're not a Christian, ask questions. We want to answer your questions. Christianity is not and has not been historically afraid of questioning things. That's why we have different denominations, because different people believe different things about the Bible. That is why we have it. And of course, there's some other, the Catholics decide to kill people because they disagree. But I'm not Catholic, so there you go. I don't have to deal with that. I could just say they're wrong because I'm Baptist. So if you have an objection that's not covered today, me or Pastor Timbo, who's at a different church doing encouraging their pastor, we would love to answer those questions. So if there's something that's not answered, or you're like, I didn't understand it, we'd be happy to answer those questions. That being said, I want to go through some common objections that I found in my community, just walking around asking questions, and some common objections I found online. Now, if you've heard any of these, just raise your hand, give me a yep or something. So here are some common objections. There are issues in translation. There are contradictions. The text is too late. It's similar to other stories and myth, and therefore it must be copied from them. That's the implication. It came from an oral tradition, and for these reasons, we can't trust the Bible. We can't trust the Bible we have today. Okay, so before we jump into these objections, and I will answer them, I want to talk about how we even got the Protestant Bible. What happened was the Old Testament is pretty much agreed on by everyone. The Jews, by the time Jesus came around, the canon was closed. They're like, here's our Old Testament, boom, done. And that is the Old Testament. The New Testament was compiled and agreed upon by the early 400s, late 300s AD. So that's less than 300 years after Christ, 350 years after Christ, they had already decided. And we can see the first generations of disciples of the apostles. So guys like Polycarp and Irenaeus, and these guys, they all pretty much had the New Testament. Most of them quoted from New Testament books. There have about 21 books that everyone agrees on. The books they don't agree on are 1 Peter, 2 Peter, 3 Peter, 1, 2, 3, and then a few others. So there's some variation, but they all agreed on the vast majority of the New Testament canon. So when the 300s roll around, there were 3 separate councils that hammered out the canon, none of which are the Council of Nicaea, which is commonly the one that we go to. However, I want to bring this up. There's a late 2nd century AD fragment. It is called a Moratorium fragment. A fragment is just a piece of paper. So there you go. It's a copy from the 8th century, however, and it's in Latin. But what a lot of scientists and scholars had said is, if you look at 2nd century Greek and how they translated that into Latin, this is pretty much the same. So they would say, even though the text we have is from the 8th century, what they are copying from is from the 2nd century. Does this make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so making sure we're there. So this contains 22 of the 27 books of the New Testament. This is dated from 100 to 200 AD. This is at worst 150 years after Jesus. We have already established this is the 22 books of the New Testament. Okay? There are 27, so we've got 5 hanging out there that people may agree or disagree on, but that's why they had 3 separate councils to decide this. In the councils, they would invite bishops and what they call bishops, they're pastors over other pastors, and they would debate and argue these things, and that's how we got the New Testament. Now, let me be clear. There are other religious texts that are very important that aren't canon, and that's okay. That doesn't mean we can't read them. That doesn't mean they're not valuable. That just means that Christianity historically has not said they are inspired at the same level as the other 66 books. That's why even in the Catholic Church, you'll see, what's it called? The Apocrypha. You'll have the Apocrypha. So that's why it's a separate section. Okay, there we go. So that's how we got the New Testament, not the Council of Nicaea. That is a myth populated by probably Voltaire, and this is why you don't trust French guys with anything. There you go. Now, having that established, let's go one at a time through these objections. Let's talk about translations. And listen, the Bible today are translated from various manuscripts, which we'll talk more in depth about, from the original languages. So the original languages, there are 3. It's Hebrew, Koine Greek, it's different than modern Greek. and then it's Aramaic. It's like 99% Hebrew and Greek, and then there's some phrases in Aramaic. Aramaic was a common tongue, so everyone would generally speak it. So if they wanted to say something specifically an Aramaic phrase, they would. Jesus uses some of them at various points. Now, they're translated straight from one to another. And I can see why some people would get hung up on this. However, in our church, if I were to go, hey, Anastasia, can you tell Vassal I think he's great? Like right now, can you tell him? Yeah. Do you see how that worked? Because Anastasia can speak both languages. So she can translate and go from one to the other pretty seamlessly. Does that make? Now it's going to translate on here and they're going to reread it and they can laugh again. So there you go. Now, I hear this objection, right? I know this isn't a perfect example, but another objection is languages change, which is true. They do. However, Koine Greek, Aramaic, and ancient Hebrew, which is different from modern Hebrew, are all what we call dead languages. So we can take the entire breadth of all writing we have in Koine Greek and go, this is where it begins, this is where it ends, and we can investigate all of it, right? So they'll be able to do this in a few hundred years with Zoomer lingo, and that is going to be terrifying for scholars to be like, what is bomb diggity ziggity, whatever they say. I don't know. I'm a Gen Z guy and I just don't understand, but it's okay. So they can take the breadth of this and say, we're going to compare all the literature and then say this word means this and this and this and this and this, and they cross-reference it across all of it. Inside of Koine Greek, there's even more specificity you can get. And so they know when certain things are written because of certain languages they use, okay? So Koine Greek, that's Greek. Ancient Hebrew is actually even better because of the diaspora, there you go. The diaspora of the Jews, they spread out and they started speaking everything. And essentially, ancient Hebrew stops there. You have different variations later on and they still wrote it. But that's why if you look at what's called the Tetragrammaton, Yahweh, we don't know what it means because they didn't have vowels. So it could be Yahweh, Yehovah, Yohevah. It doesn't matter. That's not the point. They didn't pronounce it and we don't have that language. So it's dead. We're like, oh, well, the best thing about it being dead is it doesn't change. So we can say it always translates to this, or it translates to one of these three words that mean running, ran, or has ran, something to do with running, right? We can do that with these languages. Aramaic is still spoken by various rural tribes in the Middle East, but it's essentially a dead language. It doesn't really change because we have all the writing. I think the Bedouins still speak Aramaic, and so the Bedouins don't typically write a whole bunch of stuff. So there you go. We have all three of those. They do not change. That's why we can translate from Koine Greek straight into English, because we know what they mean. All right, so let's go to contradictions. There's some apparent contradictions in the Gospels, the four, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. However, this is not odd, and it actually lends credibility to the Gospels, and I'll explain. So J. Warner Wallace, he's a cold case detective, he writes, and he says, if four people come in and say the exact same story, word for word, they're lying. Because no human does that. We all focus on different things. We see different things. We have different perspectives. So if someone comes in and they're like, you stole a Reese's peanut butter cup, and they all go, no, I did not. I was kayaking on Lake whatever. I was kayaking on Lake Havasu. And then the men are like, he stole a Reese's. No, they're not. I was kayaking on Lake Havasu. So what they did was they got together and they said, this is our story and we're sticking to it. Do not change it. We've got to get away with this. So he actually says that the contradictions in the Bible they lend credibility to them. And I'll also say this, it's not necessarily contradictions in the Gospels. There's 3 different things that Jesus says at the end of his life in 3 different Gospels, or 4 of the different Gospels, there's 3 different things. Jesus can say different last things to different last people. I don't see that as a major issue. In Matthew and Mark, there are 2 different genealogies. Matthew and Luke, excuse me, there are 2 different genealogies. Luke is Mary's, Matthew's is Joseph's. So his parents, they on both sides of the genealogy. That's why they're different. They even say in the text, a lot of the gospel contradictions are just, I am choosing to focus on this story or say this story and the way that I saw it. The other thing is the 4 gospels are written by 4 very different people. So Mark is probably Peter's account, written through Mark, and there's all sorts of craziness with Mark because whoever wrote Mark didn't know how to speak Greek. So he writes Greek like you would write Aramaic. So he uses the sentence structure of Aramaic, but writes it in Greek, and it's unique. Mark is unique amongst all ancient books in that way. It would be like me speaking English, but writing it in Spanish with Spanish tenses. So it's very odd. Luke is written by not a disciple. He was someone who would have been around the disciples, probably a follower of Jesus that was not one of the 12 in that time. And Luke, what he did was he went to everyone who was around Jesus and said, what does everyone agree on? He's a true historian. What do we know Jesus did? Because when 100 different people tell me the same story, this is how it happened. Okay, so Mark is Peter's. So Peter has a different view though, because Peter goes, I was there, I'll tell you what I saw. And Matthew was also there, and he goes, I'll tell you what I saw, I was there. And then John writes later, he says, there have already been stories written, so I'm going to tell you the stuff they didn't write. So John then writes because he's talking about the divinity of Jesus, right? And that's what he focuses on. Just because the Gospels have different focuses and different writers and write about different things or have slight variations in stories does not mean they contradict. Okay? So there's not a contradiction. But I did actually find a contradiction in 2 Samuel. So if you'll flip with me to 2 Samuel 24. There's actually 2 contradictions in this. We'll go to the first one. So 2 Samuel 24, I'm in 1 Samuel. This is not my usual Bible. Where are the chapters? All right, 2 Samuel 24. Okay, all right. So 2 Samuel 24, 1, we'll go here first. It says, and again, the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he moved David against them, saying, go and number Israel and Judah. Okay, so flip with me to 1 Chronicles 21. It's the same story. Oh, my grandma left a bookmark in this. What was that? Thanks, ma'ams. This is my grandma's Bible, and they did not have as many bookmarks as they do in modern Bibles, but it's really cool because she wrote in it. So I have a lot of my grandmother's notes. If you're a grandma or a mom, do that. It's super valuable. Anyway, so 2 Chronicles 21. Now, 2 Chronicles, 1 Chronicles, thank you, Will. Whoop. She's got another one. That makes more sense. I mixed up there. Apologies. So 1 Chronicles 21. All right. So then, and so remember, Samuel says, now the Lord moved him. This says, and Satan stood up against Israel and provoked David to number Israel. Okay, so we have a problem here, right? There are 2 very different interpretations here, apparently. Let me just say this is not a problem at all. So in the ancient mindset, you would write about the person who has the most authority. So who has more authority than Satan? God. If God allows Satan to do it, the thought is, well, God approved of it, so God might as well have done it. That is the thought. I would disagree with the theology. That's how they thought, okay? So they wrote it in such a way as that to say, well, God did it because God approved of it, so therefore God must have signed off on it more or less because he allowed it. So that's one contradiction. But let's go to 2 Samuel 24:13. Let's go here. And says, so here's the deal. David numbers Israel. They're not supposed to take a census. He doesn't obey. He does what he wants, right? David is still at fault here. Just because you're tempted doesn't mean you have to do it. There you go. So it says 13. And what am I in, bro? Oh, I'm at the wrong page. That's why. I'm like in 3 of the 30. That's not right. I apologize, guys. And God came to David and told him, shall 7 years of famine come into thy land? Oh, they fixed it in this one. Okay, so I'll tell you the Hebrew in just a second. So shall 7 years of famine come into thy land, or wilt thou flee 3 months into thy mountains? No, they have it right. 3 months into thy mountains from the enemies before they pursue thee, or that there be 3 days of pestilence in the land. Now advise and see what I answer. So David has disobeyed God, and God says, pick your punishment. Okay? So if you ever do that to your child,
Say God or Gad?
God.
Why does the NASB say Gad?
I don't know, bro. Oh, that's because, okay, Gad is the name of the prophet. Gad is the name of the prophet. The prophet is speaking for God.
Okay.
Sorry. Okay. So this is harder than I anticipated. Okay. Now that I'm in the right Chronicles, see, we could have just kept them together, but some guy in the 1300s said, no, we need to chop it up into 2. No. So he said, First Chronicles 20, see, I did it again. 21:12. It says, either 3 years of famine or 3 months to be destroyed before the foes, or 3 days of the sword of the Lord, even pestilence in the land. Okay? So we see one that has 7, 3, and 3, and one that has 3, 3, and 3. This is a problem. This obviously is a contradiction. This is the same story, 2 different ways. Now, what is interesting is pretty much everyone agrees 7 is wrong. That what happened is what we believe happened was a scribe at some point was writing down, and he had written down stories about Joseph's famine in Genesis, which is 7 years, and he just got it mixed up. And so many Jews understood that the 7 years is wrong because you have 3 choices, and so why is one of them 7 when the other 2 are 3? And even the manuscripts we have of 1 Samuel are not unanimous. Some of them say 3, some of them say 7, but the manuscripts of 1 Chronicles unanimously say 3, 3, 3. So 3 years, 3 months, 3 days. Okay. I bring this up, 1, for intellectual honesty. I'm going to be honest. And 2, because this actually proves that the Bible's been preserved. Because if we did not have Chronicles, we would not know this. God saw fit to make sure that even though a scribe made a mistake, that we are still able to correct the mistake through the various manuscripts and texts that we have of the Old and New Testament. So, there you go. That is the contradiction like that. And we talked about the beginning of the passage at the beginning. And so in the Septuagint, last thing on this. So the Septuagint is the Greek, the Hebrew to the Greek, and it was done by ancient Jews in about 2 to 1 AD, 2 to 1 BC. They, in Samuel, they just changed it to 3. So if you read the Septuagint, it's 3 years, 3 days, 3 years, 3 months, 3 days. And the same thing in Chronicles. They knew it was an error, but because a scribe had messed up, they said, we're going to keep this because for some reason, God saw fit to allow him to mess up. So we're just going to keep it in there. In no other text do you see this happen, in no other religious text. As a matter of fact, you will look at other religious texts, and if there are variants, they burn them. They did this early on in Muslim history. They said, there are too many Qurans, get them all together, we're going to burn them. Now, they did a really bad job because there's still like 30 different Qurans today, so they didn't do very well. There's still variants of the Quran, But it was, instead of let's show these variants off and let's just acknowledge there are differences in manuscripts, it's no, burn them, we all have the same. So we can't tell what's true or not, what actually happened. So there we go. This is unique to the Bible. We acknowledge there are differences in manuscripts. However, any difference in manuscript, barring a straight forgery. Now, there are some ancient manuscripts that are like, Jesus was not God. And we can go, okay, that's a wacko over there. So, but we know that because we have other variants. Every variant does not affect core theology. Does this make sense? If it's 7 years of famine or 3 years of famine, is God just to send famine upon Israel? Yes. It doesn't particularly matter. That doesn't mean we hide from them, but understand that even these are not a huge deal. Let's get into, they're similar to other stories. So it is possible for people to say the Bible has a flood story. Okay, I'm gonna pick the flood story. Bible has a flood story. Well, the Epic of Gilgamesh has a flood story too. And the Epic of Gilgamesh is before the Bible, right? And so in Gilgamesh, there's a flood story, and one person saves all the animals on a boat. And so because of this, we could say the Bible stole this story. However, the similarities aren't what we focus on, it's the differences. Someone could look at me, Lalo, and Kyle and say, oh, they're all dads to 2 sons. They must be the same person. Very obviously, our similarities are not what make the distinction. It's the differences. Secondly, the flood story is a terrible example that is very commonly used because literally every culture has a flood myth. Yep. Everyone. Even if you go down to the reservation down here at the Teo reservation, they have a flood story too. So what is more likely? That a worldwide flood actually happened and we all have this historical recollection of it that we decided to keep as humans, or that the Epic of Gilgamesh is the original and everyone copied off of them, which the flood story and for the Tohono goes back to the Epic of Gilgamesh and beyond that time period. So they have their flood story to the same time period as the Epic of Gilgamesh, separated by a couple of oceans. So you can't really say they copied. So we can say that, yeah, there are similarities in certain stories, but that's not what defines it. Some people will say, well, Jesus had similarities to other ancient, I'm going to call them messianic, but they would call them like savior figures. I'm like, yeah. And that doesn't mean that they're the same person or that they're copying off of them. It means that humanity goes, if we do, these things are universally agreed upon as good. Feeding poor people, healing sick people, helping widows. You know, we can all say these are good things even in secular societies. So it's not surprising that we make stories or make up stories or good people are mythologized because they did these good things. That doesn't mean that Jesus is copying from them. All right, so let's go to the text is too late. And because of this, we can't trust the oral tradition. Now, I will actually push back on the oral tradition, although I don't have to. In my family, there was a oral tradition that we, at one point, one of our descendants was a Cherokee Indian. Okay? So this passed down about 6 or 7 generations. We couldn't prove it until a few years ago when, guess what? We take the ancestry swab and I'm 0.7 Cherokee, which is 6 or 7 gens back. Well, then we decided to go into the historical record and stuff. One of my relatives did, and we found the girl. We found the girl. She was a full-blooded Cherokee Indian that my great-great-great-great-great-grandfather grabbed off the Trail of Tears. Yeah, so yeah, see, they apparently the Arkansas guys, they looked around and they said the white chicks are ugly. We got to grab someone else. They said the bloodline is not looking tree-ish. It is very it's very stickish. We got to get tree. So, right? So they grabbed her off the Trail of Tears. Now I'll have you know that she lived happily ever after with him and lived for 40 years and mourned him when he died first. They had like 7 or 8 kids. Anyway, we knew that before we had confirmation of it. Now listen, here's the problem. All of the first century texts were written on papyrus, which was an ancient form of paper, and it deteriorated quickly. But when it comes to the Bible, what people will say is, oh, well, you're missing puzzle pieces. That's not really true. We have 110 puzzle pieces for a 100-piece puzzle. We have to make it fit. And what we have is various manuscripts that are much later than the Bible. Go ahead and pull up the first slide. So yeah, we can go through here and say, hey, Iliad, the earliest manuscript is actually from about 400 BC. That's 300 years after the original writing. And there's 643 manuscripts. No one doubts Josephus's existence. Our earliest manuscript of him is from 400 AD. Herodotus has 8 manuscripts. That's how we know guys like Hannibal of Carthage exists. So I guess if we can't trust the Bible's manuscripts, we have 5,735 manuscripts of the New Testament. If we want to throw this out, we have to throw out all of these. We can't look at this and go, oh wow, there's a lot of manuscripts. Now some of them are later. Okay, I'll admit some of them are later. However, we can't look at those manuscripts and say the Bible is too late when the earliest manuscript we have, go ahead and flip to the next slide. The earliest manuscript we have of the New Testament is written somewhere around 150 to 90 AD. This is called P52. It's Papyrus 32. And you can actually see how they would make papyrus was it was cane stalks. So you cut them this way, and then you'd overlay them that way. And then you make paper and dry them out. Okay? So this is actually the Gospel of John. We know it's the Gospel of John. It talks about Pilate wiping his hands clean. And this is Greek. He says, I find no fault in this man, referring to Jesus. This is the earliest manuscript we have of the New Testament. Now, this is important. It is not odd to see that these manuscripts are deteriorated. It's like, why? They're kept in a desert. That's a harsh environment, right? So we can see things deteriorate, but the way we know that certain things are preserved and certain things go back to that language is kind of what I talked about earlier. It's called textual criticism. You take books that were written in 100 AD and look at the writing of other books. They're going to write like other people do in their time. And we can do that with this, and it is a word-for-word copy of the Gospel of John. This is actually front and back. So if you like books today, thank a Christian, because early Christians said, hey, we can write on the back of this too. We can save space and paper and money. So you can read part of this, and it is the reason we know it's Pilate saying, I find no fault in him. Now it's broken up because obviously it's deteriorated. Now, that's kind of how they date things. They can also use some carbon dating aspects to date them, but that's how they date things. If you go to, that's P52, that was found in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is one of the most revolutionary finds of ever. So they found all sorts of things. Now, that's great. That's the New Testament. The New Testament is pretty well attested. We have complete books of the New Testament from AD 300. Which is super early. Now, if you'll go to the next scribe, this is called the Ketef Hinnom scroll. This is a piece of silver, and it was rolled. So it's a silver scroll. They have dated this to before the exile. So if you read the Jews, they get exiled to Babylon and Assyria and stuff like that. So this is 600 BC. BC, friends. And so you can see it's faded, obviously, but they have written on this scroll. Now, this was found in 1978, and it says this, translated into English. It says, may Yahweh bless, may bless you, Yahweh. It's Hebrew, so everything's backwards. So it's, may Yahweh bless you, keep you, make his face shine upon you, and grant you peace. Okay? Now, if that sounds familiar, it should. If you'll flip with me to number 6, I do have this one right. Number 6, I have one bookmark, and that's what I use it on. So number 6, 24 and 26. Now, this was found in 1979. Okay? This is important because what we should be able to do is say, if the Bible's preserved, any Bible before 1979 should say basically the same thing. Well, friends, I happen to have a Bible, a physical Bible from 1972, 1973, excuse me. If you want to come see the copyright, you're welcome to. That's why I picked it. And so let's read Numbers 5 is, it's Numbers 6, 24 through 26. Okay, let's go here. Number 6, 24 through 26. It says, and this is what my Bible said. The Lord bless thee, keep thee. The Lord make his face shine upon thee and be gracious to you. The Lord lift up his countenance and upon thee give thee peace. I don't know. I feel like that's the same. Like we can say this, or may the Lord bless you, keep you, make his face shine upon you, grant you peace. It's the same, guys. So we can say, even at the very least, this has been preserved. And if this has been preserved and Numbers has been preserved, how much more care would they have taken with the other text? I'm gonna put this one away. There we go. Right. Guys, every time, literally every time there's a major objection to the Bible, archaeology, textual criticism, and modern sciences prove the Bible right, even when everyone else says the Bible's wrong. So if you want to get into archaeology, this is how in the early 1800s, archaeologists found the various sites. You want to know how they found Jericho? He said, where does the Bible say Jericho's around? And then they would go to where the Bible said Jericho was around, see a big giant mound and go, we should probably dig there. Lo and behold, we find Jericho. We do this at Ai. We do this at Sodom. We do this at Gomorrah. They literally would walk around with their King James Bible and say, that seems about right. Let's look. That is how accurate this is, that from well over 3,000 years ago, we can go and say, this is about where it is. The city of Ur, where Abraham lived. We can go, it's about here. Let's go find it. That is how accurate this is geographically. And this is not a geographical book. It is a theological book. However, it is so stinking accurate that guys can even read through these and thous and figure out where the places were. Okay, that's one. Another one is, for a long time in the 1800s, they would say the Hittites don't exist. They're a culture, I know, foreign to us, right? Everyone knows the Hittites exist. The foreign culture, they just made it up. They needed some enemy. Well, lo and behold, they go dig around in what's modern day Turkey and find the capital of the Hittites, which, by the way, there are inscriptions that say, this is Hattusa, capital of the Hittites. I don't know. It's almost like the Bible's true. In the Bible, it talks about Asherah poles and Astarte poles. So Astarte was a goddess that we have lots of information on. Asherah was assumed to be the same thing, just a kind of a mistranslation or a different form of worship, until we find documents, inscriptions, various things, temples to Asherah, and distinctives of it on various tablets from the Babylonians that worship Asherah instead of Astarte. I can't remember if it's the Babylonians, but we did find writing saying, oh, worship to the Asherah, oh, worship to the Astarte. They're not the same. If it was one, they wouldn't have said both, right? Okay. David has been attacked in recent years, saying David was a myth. He's like King Arthur. He compiled a bunch of things, which is really interesting because we have recently found a synagogue that says, out of the line of David from the 5th century BC. I'm going to go on. I have two more. So Luke, all of Luke, we can go to Luke and say, okay, well, there's a contradiction in Luke because Luke says this person was governor and they took a census and it wasn't at that time. Here's the thing. Luke is right. They are wrong because the governor didn't have political power. The general he names had the political power. And they did call a census. And if you want, can you go back to the first slide for me? And I know they had a census, and everyone agrees they have a census in the ancient world, because Josephus says, if you don't believe Jesus really existed and lived in Nazareth, go to Alexandria, read the scrolls of the census. So if we want to say the Bible's false and Luke's making it up, well then Josephus didn't happen and we can't believe anything. All right, 2 more. Naming conventions in the New Testament. If you ever read the New Testament and go, there's a lot of Marys. There's a lot of Johns and variations of Jesus, right? You know why? Because they named them that. They were common names of the time. Just like today, we would go, we all have different names. That was not common back then. They would have a lot of the same names. So Simon, common name. What is his name? Judas, common name. Jesus has a brother named Judas. Jude is a variation of Judas. Joshua, common name. Jesus is a variation of Joshua. So you go through this, and we can go and look at ossuaries and burial tombs and inscriptions and names and censuses and go, man, there's a lot of Marys. And the New Testament, I couldn't find the actual paper, but a guy wrote a paper. He said the New Testament is 98% accurate to the naming conventions of the time. Josephus, which I just yelled about, has a 47% accuracy to the naming conventions of the time. Okay, last. This is a funny one to me. The naming conventions is only knowledge. Then synagogues having idols in them. So we can go to synagogues today from the time that the Jews lived in Israel before exile, and they'll have worship to other gods in them. And then people are like, see, this shows that they're a polytheistic thing. Or you could read the Bible and see God say, they're worshiping other gods in my house. What are you doing? The Bible confirms this over and over and over and over and over again. Last but not least, you go to the Ark of the Covenant. If you look at the Ark of the Covenant, we have discovered that if you read ancient Egyptian religious furniture, the Ark of the Covenant is very similar to it in dimension and style. There are different things that differentiate it. Again, differences are what matter, not the similarities. But it's almost like these people had lived in Egypt, knew how to make boxes like the Egyptians, and made them. It's almost like if you look through the Bible, we can trust it because time after time after time, it proves itself. Every time. All right. There are a couple other things. There's this principle, it's a secondary historical principle. It's called the principle of embarrassment. If you're writing a hero, your heroes don't do embarrassing things. If you're making it up, they just don't. Superman doesn't have irredeemable things. We can look through the list of kings in Israel. They all do horrible things. We can look through judges. They all do horrible things except Deborah, which leads into that's also embarrassing. Deborah has no blemish on her and she's a woman. Keep in mind, this is a patriarchal society. That's not something you would write if it wasn't true. When the girls run from the tomb to announce to the apostles that Jesus has risen, that is why, the reason why John and Peter run after them. And John beat Peter to the tomb. He made sure it was in there, so I'll make sure that it keeps getting told. So John beat Peter to the tomb. The reason they did that is because they didn't trust the account of women, because it was not as seen as reliable. I'm not saying that's right. That's the way they thought. Okay. Lastly, I'm going to call this the principle of suffering. You don't die horrible, horrific deaths claiming to have seen something unless if you saw it. So all the disciples, all 12 of them, they died horrible deaths. Thomas is speared to death somewhere in India. Peter is crucified, probably upside down. James is beheaded. All of these guys die except John. Interestingly, John is the only one who didn't leave Jesus at the cross. Just saying. Although John was attempted to be boiled alive and he survived it. Okay, you don't go to Hello. Okay, we're good. You don't go to a horrible, awful death for a lie. That's dumb. Now you might 2 or 3 generations down be so radicalized and believe this lie, right? I'm talking about the first generation of the apostles. Stephen is stoned to death because he won't recant Jesus. Paul is stoned, shipwrecked, stoned again, scourged, and eventually beheaded because he believed in Jesus. You don't do these things if it's a lie. You just don't. The Bible has earned the benefit of the doubt over and over and over again. And you may not like it. It may be offensive. But it's earned it. So instead of approaching the Bible and saying, we're going to set this bar ridiculously high. Like I said, if we had treated any other historical book like the Bible, we don't know anything about history. Caesar doesn't exist. Alexander surely doesn't exist. If this is the story of God's relationship with humanity, which is what the Bible says, you can read through every page of the Bible and say, this is how God is relating to awful, horrible, evil humans. If this is the story, what should we do? There's a lot of information, right? I think I've done a pretty good job of laying out a case why this is what it says it is and why it's been preserved. But if this is truly the story of God's love and care for humanity, I think we should do 3 things. One is read it.
That's right.
Just read it. Even if you don't believe it, just read it. At least it's more accurate than freaking Herodotus, okay? Read it. Now, I would say after you read it, if it's been preserved as well as it has, you should follow it. You should follow what it says, even when it makes you uncomfortable. And lastly, we should share it. The Bible is unique among human literature. It is a collection of 66 books that spans well over 1,000 years, telling one unified story of this is God's love for you. And it's culminated perfectly in the person of Jesus Christ. And I want to flip to Luke 5. So Luke 5, this is Jesus talking. And he says this, Luke 5:30 and 32. And the Pharisees and the scribes began grumbling at his disciples, Jesus' disciples, saying, why are you drinking even tax collectors? And Jesus said to them, it is not those who are well who need a physician, but those who are sick. I've come to call the righteous. I have not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. Listen, I know this week has been intense. We'll say intense. And I know a lot of us are looking for some sort of grounding, something that we can hold on to. And the world seems out of sorts. And maybe you're saying, I need to hear from God this week. I want you to know that God has been in control of the recording of this and has made sure we know what this says over and over and over again. Let's flip to Matthew. I want to read what Jesus says in Matthew 7. Matthew 7, 24. Oh, that's the wrong verse. That's okay. Matthew 6. Huh. No, I'm in the wrong passage. It's Matthew 7, 24. I put the bookmark in the wrong spot. Y'all, I'm having a rough day. Rough day today. He said, you know what? Oh, it's in John 10. Sorry. Y'all, it has been a week. Let me just tell you, okay, I'll sum up here, because I know it. John 10, Jesus says, I'm the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for his sheep. He says, I am the door. And what you would do as a shepherd is you would have a little circular fold. So this is John 10, 7 through 18, if you want to flip there. So you have a circular, he says, I'm the door. You're like, he's talking about a door, but he's a shepherd. What you would do at night is you would get your sheep in your sheepfold and you would sit. And you would lean your back against the rock and you would fall asleep, because anyone or anything that is coming after your sheep has to go through you first. That's it. Jesus is saying, this is me. I am the protector. I am the guider. I am the sustainer. You do have to follow me, though. Then I just want to read the last verse because I remember it in John 10. All right. So this is John 10:18. No, I'll start in 17. Actually, I'll start in 16. It says, I have other sheep which are not of this fold. By the way, if you're not a Jew, we're the other sheep. So if you're Gentile, you're the other sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this fold, and I must bring them also. And they will hear my voice, and they will become one flock with one shepherd. And for this reason, the Father loves me, because I lay down my life so that I may take it again. No one has taken it from me, but I lay it down on my own initiative. I have authority to lay it down, and I have authority to take it up again. And this is the commandment I received from my Father. John 10 is Jesus talking about, if you're one of my sheep, you'll listen to my voice. And listen, friends, there's been a lot of crazy stuff that's going on this week. I'm here for it, okay? But Jesus says, I'm your protector. I'm your provider. And let me tell you something. Jesus, the one condition of being a part of his flock is you gotta come in. Say, Jesus, I'll follow you. And you might have to give up a little bit of freedom so you can experience true freedom. If that's you today, if you're like, Jesus, I don't know where to go, but I know you're the one I need to follow. We're gonna just open it up for prayer. I'm gonna lead you through a sinner's prayer. If that's something you want to do, if you're feeling God tug on you, if you're like, I need a savior, just pray a simple prayer like this. It's, God, I know I'm a sinner. Thank you for coming in the person of Jesus Christ. Thank you for dying for my sins. I want to follow you, and I submit to your will for my life. Thank you for being a good God who's always there for me. Now, if you prayed a prayer like that and you'd like to be baptized, just check it off on the card. Or if you prayed a prayer, you want more info, we've got connection cards. We'd love for you to fill those out so we could talk with you. I'm going to give you a moment to pray if you're a believer and just talk with God. I think a lot of times throughout our week, we get so busy, we don't have time to talk. So I want to be intentional with this time. And if there's something on your heart, there's something this week that just sat with you wrong, just talk with God. He can handle it. I'm going to give us a few moments to pray, and then I'll come and we'll dismiss. And God, we know you're our good shepherd. In the Psalms, David says, you lead us beside still waters and you restore my soul. We want to ask for peace this week. We want to ask for protection this week for us. But more importantly, God, I want to ask that you give us opportunities to see hurting, lost people who need a savior, who need a shepherd, and give us the boldness and courage to talk to them about you this week. I pray that you bless us as we go. I pray that you guide us through this week and bring us back next week safely so we can learn more about your word. I pray for all this in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, it's an honor. If you have questions, I'll be over here. I gotta drink some water because I'm dying. But it's been an honor. It was a little long today, but that's okay. I'm gonna be over here if you have questions, comments, anything. So it's an honor it's an honor again. I'll say it in threes. We talked about threes. I'll say it three. There you go. It's an honor to be here and be able to preach. So God bless you, and go give them heaven.